I wanted to start off the show by talking about the Denver Nuggets and what the upcoming postseason looks like for them, considering the fact that by many, including myself, I do believe that this is the best team in the NBA. But what is interesting, if you look in terms of NBA Finals odds, it has been well documented, at least on this show itself, the fact that the Boston Celtics are the favorites. Now, this isn't necessarily surprising. The Celtics have the best record in the NBA this season, and specifically, and sort of what I want to dive into here, is the fact that the Nuggets in the Western Conference have a much more difficult strength of schedule for their playoff path. They are facing off against the Los Angeles Lakers in the first round. This is a rematch from the Western Conference Finals last year. So I guess we will sort of start there, talking about that series, because this is one that is definitely outside of this series, I believe, and the Knicks 76ers series in the Eastern Conference. I think that this is going to be the one that have most people's eyes on it. Of course, LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, the best player in the NBA, and this rematch. And I do think that there is a real chance this can be last season. Again, if you just look at the 4-0 sweep for Denver, you could say that you could maybe think that it wasn't competitive, but in reality, every single game was a close one. It was the smallest margin of victory between any two teams in a sweep in NBA playoffs history. And now they get this rematch a year later, where I do believe that the teams have evened out to some levels, where you look from a Lakers perspective on this, and you've gotten a healthier version of both LeBron James and Anthony Davis. LeBron was dealing with the foot injury that kept him out for a significant amount of time last year. Now he was able to come back and play through it, and really through that playoff run, it didn't seem like he was hindered necessarily, but it was something that was sort of underlying. And now we come into this year, and you have these massive numbers of games played from LeBron and AD, who have both been sort of inconsistent in terms of being able to just stay on the court. Anthony Davis playing a career high in games played over the course of a season. And it's not just the two of them, where this is a different version of D'Angelo Russell, where really since December or so, when the trade rumors started coming out about him, he has taken his game to another level, has been one of the legitimate best shooters in the NBA this season. Now, there is something, I like D'Angelo Russell. I feel like for a handful of years, he's almost in that similar archetype, and this might be disrespectful considering how these past seasons went, but I'm just talking about archetype wise, such as a Jordan Poole, where he has these really high highs, but some of the decision making and the buy-in from a team perspective can be questioned. But at the same time, Russell now at his more mature age, he does seem to be a lot more locked in and more reliable. So I'm not saying that this is going to fall out, but I also wouldn't be shocked necessarily if things did sort of fall apart from that perspective. Again, not trying to predict anything on that, but all that to be said, I bring this up because D'Angelo Russell has been significantly better than he was last season at the time. Now, on the other side, and the Lakers in general, a better three-point shooting team than they were last year, in large part because of the fact that D'Angelo Russell has been able to bring that level of offense that he has. Now, still pretty top-heavy on the Lakers side of this, but in a similar way, the Nuggets do not have the same level of depth that they did last season. Now, they have a lot of pieces that they can throw out there and have be contributors, but they don't have necessarily, and we've talked about this on the show before, but the veteran Jeff Green minutes, the Bruce Brown who would stand in the corner and shoot 50-60% from, I forget which side, but specifically one side of the corner, I believe it was the left corner, he was automatic from, and they just don't necessarily have that. Bruce Brown also played a significant role last year in being a rotational defender. I really like Christian Brown. I really like Peyton Watson as well, the way that the two of them can come in, provide those energy type minutes, and be effective for the Nuggets, but I don't think that they necessarily have the same level of flexibility from a depth perspective that they did last year, and we've seen at times, specifically in that stretch to end off the regular season. I know Murray played the last 4 or 5 games, but there was a stretch there where Jamal Murray wasn't playing, and you could see that in those instances outside of Nikola Jokic, there really wasn't much else going on. And even still, we saw the massive discrepancy in the regular season this year in terms of Jokic when he is on the court versus when he is off the court. A plus 23.7 points per 100 possession rating in the NBA when he is on the court versus when he's off the court for the Nuggets. Basically, in simpler terms, they get outscored a lot more than they outscore other teams when Jokic is not available for them. He is the nucleus of nucleuses in terms of being the centerpiece of that team, and I do feel like there is just, a little less there from a supporting cast standpoint. Now, I am picking the Nuggets in this series, and I expect them to do so in 5-6 games. So I do sort of talk about this whole series just for the perspective of, it's not a total shoo-in that they win this series, and LeBron James hasn't won a game actually in Denver in something like 4 calendar years at this point. That's not even a, hyperbole. It's just a fact. And playoff LeBron is a different animal. And I do think that the Lakers are going to be a tough out. Much more difficult than the Timberwolves were last year, when the Timberwolves headed into the playoffs were a mess. There was tons of chemistry issues. The Kyle Anderson, Rudy Gobert fight had just happened. Jaden McDaniels took himself out of the series by breaking his hand, punching a wall in the final game of the regular season. So I do think that they are going to be pushed a little bit more in their initial situation here. And then from there, they're going to have to play the winner of the Timberwolves versus the Phoenix Suns. And those are both teams that you can't necessarily overlook either. And then you go into the Western Conference Finals, where there's a chance that you're going to be playing a Luka Doncic and the Mavericks, who notably beat the Nuggets in a close one on St. Patrick's Day. It could be the Clippers, and if they're rolling to that point, as long as they're fully healthy, they are a very formidable opponent. So all this to say, I expect the Nuggets to still come out of the Western Conference, but they do have a lot on their plate ahead of them, even to make it to the finals, where in comparison to the Eastern Conference with the Boston Celtics, who are the betting favorites to win their respective conference, it is a much different picture, where the Celtics are the 1 seed. They are going to be playing the winner of the game tonight between the Miami Heat and Chicago Bulls. The Heat could have been a very tough out and a potential upset pick for a lot of people if it weren't for the fact that Jimmy Butler is expected to miss multiple weeks with the MCL injury that he suffered in the Heat's game on Wednesday night. And the Chicago Bulls, for I think one of the most fun, mediocre teams in recent years. They have a lot of very likable players on their roster, and I don't think that, the Celtics... the Celtics do probably win that series in 5 games. I like the Bulls a lot, and I feel like they can be a tough out on any given night. In terms of a series as a whole, a much different picture. Then they get some unproven teams between the winner of the Cavaliers and Magic series, and then a chance to face off in the Eastern Conference Finals as well, where the Knicks are the second best team in the Eastern Conference. I do feel like they are at a different level when they are fully healthy. It seems like that's going to be the case. OG Anunoby is really the one in particular that I'm looking at in terms of whether or not that, because Brunson, knock on wood, he's been durable this season, but Anunoby, we already know that Julius Randle is going to be out for the series, but I think that Anunoby would play a massive role in that potential Boston-New York series. But I still feel like with the level of offensive creation outside of Jalen Brunson, the Knicks are, a little bit lackluster there. And they've had some role players that have been absolutely massive for them this season. Dante DiVincenzo being a most improved candidate, other than the fact that he actually came short in terms of just seconds, which is a real travesty. I like the 65 game limit for being eligible for postseason awards, but that is a pretty tough look for DiVincenzo, who played the entire season for the Knicks. But anyways, I just feel like in comparison, these two teams that have seemed like it's going to be, I wouldn't quite say a shoo-in necessarily, but these two teams that seems like through the regular season were somewhat on a collision course to meet in the finals. The Nuggets do just have it a lot tougher than the Celtics do. Now, I think they'll be able to overcome that as long as they're fully healthy. I do think that they are the best team in the NBA. I mentioned health. It's obviously a massive part of NBA history. If you look at recent years, there always seems to be at least one or two injuries that sort of derail what we expect to happen in the postseason. Now, last year with the Nuggets probably was a little bit of the exception. If you're really looking to, find some key injuries along the way, you can look at the Clippers in the first round with Kawhi Leonard, who ended up missing that entire series. You had Jason Tatum in the first 2 minutes of Game 7 against the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals. That was another example of a key injury. He may not have even been good to go. But again, we're getting into hypotheticals there. There's really no need. But we've already seen so far in this playoffs, with Giannis going down a couple weeks ago, with Joel Embiid still battling back from his injury, the status surrounding Kawhi Leonard, it seems like nobody in that Clippers organization really knows what his status is going to be headed into the postseason. The injury bug is always a prominent factor of how the playoffs play out, and I know it's a little bit of a bad omen to even necessarily be talking about it, but I did just sort of want to say that as a reminder of how these things play out. And the Nuggets, I feel like, are very perceptible if anything were to happen. Hopefully it doesn't, but I don't feel like they have the same level of depth. But in general, with their playoff path, I think that there really wasn't much that they could have done, because even if they were the 1 seed, they would be playing the winner of the Sacramento Kings and New Orleans Pelicans, who might be without Zion Williamson. So that probably would have been the one area in which they could have found their way into a much more favorable situation. But I also feel like the second round matchup of the Clippers and Mavericks, again, assuming that Kawhi is playing, that would maybe be more difficult than playing the winner of Minnesota Suns, who, again, I don't know why I'm talking so much about the injuries, but it really is the more you look at it, because Minnesota, how is Karl Anthony Towns going to look as he continues to work his way back into playing shape after missing the amount of time he did with the meniscus injury? So really only time will tell here. I have the Denver Nuggets coming out of the first round, and coming out of the Western Conference in general. And if they are going to face off against the Boston Celtics, we got two very close games during their regular season series during the regular season, And I think that we could be in for another very entertaining one again. Nuggets came out on top 2-0 against the Celtics this year. I feel like we would be likely looking at a Nuggets championship. But that is all we have time for on this. Stick with us, and we will be right back.